The private jet touched down 3 hours earlier than planned. Richard Chen unbuckled his seatbelt and grabbed his leather bag from the overhead compartment. The meeting in Singapore had wrapped up faster than expected, which meant he could finally sleep in his own bed tonight instead of another hotel room. After 2 weeks of back-to-back conferences and investor meetings, all he wanted was peace and quiet. His driver was waiting at the airport, holding up the usual sign even though they both knew it wasn't necessary. They had been working together for 6 years now. The drive home was smooth, cutting through the evening traffic on roads that Richard knew by heart. He looked out the window at the city lights, his mind already shifting from business mode to home mode. He thought about taking a long shower, maybe watching something mindless on television, and definitely checking on his collection in the garage. The garage. That was his sanctuary. Most billionaires collected art or rare wines. Richard collected vintage motorcycles. Not just any motorcycles, but the kind that made other collectors weep with envy. His crown jewel was a 1952 Vincent Black Lightning, one of only 30 ever made. He had paid $500,000 for it at an auction in London, outbidding a famous actor and an oil tycoon from Texas. The bike was more than just metal and chrome to him. It represented freedom, beauty, and a simpler time when things were built to last forever. When the car pulled through the iron gates of his estate, Richard noticed something felt different. His house manager, an older gentleman named Thomas who never got flustered about anything, was waiting at the front door. That was unusual. Thomas typically retired to his quarters by 8 in the evening, and it was almost 9 now. Richard stepped out of the car and immediately sensed tension in the air. Thomas walked toward him with quick steps, his face showing an emotion Richard rarely saw on him. Worry. Deep worry. "Mr. Chen, welcome back. I apologize for disturbing you the moment you arrive, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention," Thomas said, his voice lower than usual. Richard felt his stomach tighten. A situation? In his world, that word could mean anything from a security breach to a financial crisis. He followed Thomas into the house, through the marble hallway and into the study. "What happened? Is everyone all right?" Richard asked, setting down his bag. "Everyone is safe, sir. But something has occurred that I felt you needed to know about right away. It involves one of the staff members." Thomas paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It involves Rosa." Rosa. Richard knew her well, or at least as well as an employer knows an employee who works quietly and efficiently. She had been his housekeeper for 3 years, maybe closer to 4 now. A woman in her early 40s, originally from somewhere in Central America. She always arrived early, worked without complaint, and left without fanfare. He remembered hiring her because she was the only candidate who didn't seem impressed by his wealth. She had looked him in the eye during the interview and said she just needed honest work to support her daughter. He respected that. What about Rosa? Richard asked, his mind racing through possibilities. Had she quit suddenly? Was she sick? Thomas took a breath. "Sir, your Vincent Black Lightning is missing from the garage. The security footage shows that Rosa took it yesterday evening around 7 p.m. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He actually took a step backward. His Vincent, his prized possession, the motorcycle he had spent years hunting down, gone. And Rosa, of all people, had taken it. That's impossible, Richard heard himself say, even though he knew Thomas would never make such a claim without being absolutely certain. Rosa wouldn't. She has never taken anything. Not even leftover food without asking first. I understand this is shocking, sir. I was shocked myself when security alerted me this morning. But the footage is clear. She entered the garage using her access code, wheeled the motorcycle out and rode away. She was wearing a helmet and carrying what appeared to be blankets or cushions on the back seat. Richard felt a mix of emotions crashing over him like waves, betrayal, confusion, anger, hurt. How could someone he trusted do this? He had been good to his staff, paid them well above market rates, given them benefits that most domestic workers never received. And this was how Rosa repaid him? "Have you called the police?" Richard asked, his voice coming out harder than he intended. "Not yet, sir. I wanted to speak with you first. The motorcycle has a GPS tracker installed, as you know. We can locate it whenever you wish." Richard walked to the window and stared out at the dark garden. His mind was spinning. Part of him wanted to call the police immediately, to have Rosa arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. She had stolen a $500,000 motorcycle, That was serious crime, the kind that came with serious jail time. But another part of him, a quieter part, kept whispering questions. Why would Rosa do this? What could possibly drive someone so careful, so honest, to suddenly steal the most valuable thing in his garage? She knew about the cameras. She knew she would be caught. This didn't make sense. Show me the footage, Richard said finally. They went to the security room, a small office off the main hallway where monitors displayed feeds from cameras all around the property. Thomas pulled up the recording from the previous evening. Richard watched as Rosa appeared on screen walking toward the garage. Even on the grainy security footage, he could see something was wrong. Her body language was different. She wasn't moving with her usual calm efficiency. She looked frantic, desperate even. The camera inside the garage showed her approaching the Vincent. She stood there for a long moment, her hand on the seat, and Richard could swear he saw her shoulders shake. Was she crying? Then she wheeled the bike out, mounted it, and the engine roared to life. She sat there for another moment before finally riding away into the evening. Can we track it now? Richard asked. Thomas nodded and pulled up another program on the computer. A map appeared with a blinking red dot. It appears to be stationary at this location. It has been there since approximately 4 a.m. this morning. Richard leaned closer to study the map. The location was about 40 minutes away, in a part of the city he never visited. A neighborhood where the houses were small and close together, where people worked 2 jobs to make rent. What do you want to do, sir? Thomas asked quietly. Richard stood up straight and checked his watch. It was getting late, but sleep was no longer on his mind. He had a decision to make. Call the police and let the law handle this, or confront Rosa himself and demand answers. The logical choice was obvious. She had committed a crime. She deserved to be punished. But something in that security footage bothered him. The way she had touched the motorcycle, the way she had paused. That wasn't the behavior of a common thief. That was the behavior of someone making an impossible choice. I want to talk to her first, Richard said. Tomorrow morning when she comes to work. Don't tell her that I am home or that I know about the motorcycle. I want to see what she does. Thomas nodded slowly. As you wish, sir. Though I should mention, Rosa called this morning and said she would be coming in late tomorrow. Family emergency, she said. Family emergency. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was happening here was bigger than a stolen motorcycle. He could feel it in his bones. Something had pushed Rosa to break every rule, to risk everything she had built over 3 years of hard work. And tomorrow morning, he would find out what. Richard barely slept that night. He kept replaying the security footage in his mind, trying to understand what would make Rosa do something so out of character. By 5 in the morning, he gave up on sleep entirely and went down to his home gym. Sometimes a good workout cleared his head, but not today. Today his mind stayed clouded with questions. At 7:30 he showered and dressed in casual clothes instead of his usual business suit. He wanted to appear calm, approachable even, though his insides were twisted with a mixture of anger and curiosity. Thomas had informed him that Rosa usually arrived by 8, but today she had asked to come in at 9 because of her family emergency. That gave Richard an extra hour to prepare himself for the conversation. He sat in his kitchen drinking coffee, watching the clock on the wall tick forward with agonizing slowness. The kitchen was Rosa's domain. She kept it spotless, organized in a way that made sense. There were little touches everywhere that showed she cared about her work. Fresh flowers in a simple vase by the window, spices arranged alphabetically, dish towels folded precisely. This wasn't the workspace of someone planning to betray their employer. At 8:55, Richard heard the familiar sound of the side door opening. His heart rate picked up. He stayed seated at the kitchen island, his coffee cup in hand, trying to look casual even though every muscle in his body was tense. Rosa came around the corner carrying her usual canvas bag. When she saw him sitting there, she froze. Her face went from surprise to something that looked like terror. The bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thud. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you were back." Richard studied her face. She looked exhausted. No, exhausted was too simple a word. She looked destroyed. Her eyes were bloodshot and puffy, like she had been crying for hours. There were deep shadows under them that makeup couldn't hide. Her hands, usually so steady, were trembling. "I came home early," Richard said, keeping his voice neutral. "We need to talk, Rosa." She nodded slowly, her eyes dropping to the floor. I know. Do you know what we need to talk about? Yes. Her voice cracked on that single word. Richard set down his coffee cup carefully. Then maybe you should tell me what happened to my motorcycle. Rosa's whole body seemed to crumple. She reached out and grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. For a moment, Richard thought she might actually collapse. He half stood, instinct telling him to help her, but he caught himself. He needed answers first. I took it, Rosa said, still not looking at him. I took your motorcycle without permission. I know what I did was wrong, Mr. Chen. I know it was stealing. I have no excuse. The admission hung in the air between them. Richard had expected denial, maybe some elaborate story. But this raw honesty caught him off guard. You're right. It was stealing, Richard said, hearing the hardness in his own voice. That motorcycle is worth more than most people make in 10 years. Do you understand that? Yes. I trusted you, Rosa. For almost 4 years, I've trusted you in my home, around my things, with access to everything. And you repaid that trust by taking the most valuable thing I own. Now Rosa did look up, and the pain in her eyes made Richard's anger falter for just a moment. Tears were streaming down her face, but she wasn't sobbing. She just stood there, tears falling silently, her hands gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I know, she whispered. I know, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring back my motorcycle. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. Richard stood up now, moving closer but keeping the kitchen island between them. Where is it, Rosa? Where's my bike? It's safe. It's parked in a secure lot. I have the ticket. Not a scratch on it, I promise. I was so careful. The words came out in a rush. I was going to return it today. I was going to bring it back and then tell you what I did. I was going to accept whatever happened next. Police, jail, whatever. I deserve it. Richard shook his head, confused. If you were going to return it, why take it in the first place? This doesn't make any sense. You're not making any sense. Rosa wiped her face with the back of her hand, a gesture so tired and defeated that it made her look 10 years older. You're right. I'm not making sense. Nothing about this makes sense. Nothing about any of this is okay. Then explain it to me. Richard heard his voice rising and forced himself to lower it. Help me understand why someone I trusted would do this. Rosa closed her eyes. More tears escaped and ran down her cheeks. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Not just fear or shame, but a kind of desperate courage. Can I show you something? She asked. Can I take you somewhere? It's not far. Maybe 40 minutes. If you understand why, then you can call the police. I won't fight it. I just need you to see. This was not what Richard had expected. He had expected excuses, lies, maybe even anger thrown back at him. But this request, this plea to show him something, caught him completely unprepared. Why should I go anywhere with you? Why should I do anything except call the police right now? Because I've worked for you for almost 4 years and I've never lied to you, Rosa said, her voice gaining a bit of strength. Not once. You can check my record. You can ask Thomas. I've never been late without calling. I've never broken anything and hidden it. I've never taken anything that wasn't mine. Not until 2 nights ago, she was right. Richard knew she was right. Her employment record was spotless. She had even returned a $50 bill once that had fallen out of his pocket, tracking him down to give it back. That kind of honesty was rare. If I come with you, if I see whatever you want to show me, that doesn't mean I'm not pressing charges, Richard said slowly. I know. I understand. I just need you to know why. Not to forgive me. Not to let me off. Just to understand. Rosa's voice broke again. Please, I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for my daughter. Those last words hit Richard in the chest like a hammer. Her daughter. He remembered from Rosa's job application years ago that she had a child. A girl. He had seen a photo once on Rosa's phone when she was checking something. A teenage girl with Rosa's eyes and a bright smile. What does your daughter have to do with this? Richard asked. Fresh tears spilled from Rosa's eyes. Everything. She's everything. She's why I came to this country. She's why I work so hard. She's why I did something I never thought I could do. Rosa's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She's why I stole from the one person who's been kind to me. Richard felt something shift inside him. His anger was still there, burning hot, but curiosity was overtaking it. Something terrible had happened. He could see it written all over Rosa's face, in every line of her body. Where is she now? He heard himself ask. In the hospital, the same place as your motorcycle. Rosa reached into her pocket and pulled out a parking ticket. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. I can show you. I can prove it. Everything I'm saying is true. Richard stared at the parking ticket, then at Rosa, then back at the ticket. This woman had stolen his most prized possession and was now asking him to trust her one more time. Every logical bone in his body screamed that this was crazy, that he should call the police immediately and let them sort this out. But something in Rosa's eyes stopped him. That desperate courage, that raw honesty, the way she wasn't making excuses or begging for forgiveness. She just wanted him to understand. Get your bag, Richard said finally. You're going to take me to see whatever this is, and then we're going to figure out what happens next. Rosa nodded, relief flooding her face even though she must have known this didn't mean she was off the hook. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you for listening. Richard didn't respond. He just grabbed his car keys and headed for the garage, his mind racing with possibilities and questions. Whatever he was about to see, he had a feeling it was going to change everything. The drive started in complete silence. Rosa sat in the passenger seat of Richard's car, her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring straight ahead. Richard kept his eyes on the road, following her quiet directions as they left his neighborhood and headed into parts of the city he rarely visited. Turn left here. Straight for 2 miles, right at the light. Rosa's voice was barely audible, like she was afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile agreement had brought them to this moment. Richard watched the neighborhoods change through his windshield. The large houses with manicured lawns gave way to apartment complexes. Then those gave way to smaller, older homes packed close together. The streets got narrower. The paint on buildings looked more faded. This was a world Richard knew existed but never really saw. He donated to charities that helped people in neighborhoods like this, but he had never actually driven through them, never really looked at the faces of people walking on the sidewalks. How much further? He asked, breaking the silence. About 10 more minutes. The hospital is just past the industrial area ahead. Rosa's voice was steadier now, but still quiet. Hospital. The word hung between them. Richard's mind was racing with possibilities, none of them good. He wanted to ask more questions, but something held him back. He had agreed to see, not to interrogate. The questions could come later. They passed a row of warehouses and factory buildings, then the hospital came into view. It wasn't one of the big modern medical centers downtown where Richard's own doctor worked. This was an older building, functional but worn. The parking lot was half full and Rosa directed him to a spot near the back. The motorcycle is here? Richard asked, turning off the engine. Rosa nodded and pointed to a covered parking area for motorcycles and scooters. Richard could see the distinctive shape of his Vincent Black Lightning under a protective cover. Even from a distance, he could tell it was his bike. His shoulders relaxed slightly. At least she had told the truth about that. Come, Rosa said softly, opening her door. Please. They walked across the parking lot toward the hospital entrance. Rosa moved quickly despite her exhaustion, like her body knew this path by heart. Richard followed, feeling more and more like he had stepped into a different reality. Just yesterday, he had been in Singapore closing a business deal worth millions. Now he was following his housekeeper into a hospital to understand why she had stolen from him. Inside, the hospital smelled like disinfectant and cafeteria food. The floors were clean but old, the walls painted in that particular shade of pale green that seemed to exist only in medical buildings. Rosa signed in at the front desk and the security guard nodded at her like he recognized her. How many times had she been here? They took the elevator to the 4th floor. Richard noticed Rosa's hands were shaking as she pressed the button. Whatever was up there, whatever she was about to show him, it was taking everything she had to face it again. The elevator doors opened to a hallway lined with patient rooms. A nurse at the station looked up and gave Rosa a small, sad smile. She's awake, the nurse said gently. Had some breakfast about an hour ago. Thank you, Christine, Rosa replied. They stopped at room 412. Rosa's hand went to the door handle, then paused. She turned to look at Richard, her eyes pleading. Her name is Lucia. She's 16. And she's very sick. Rosa's voice broke. Please, when you see her, please don't be angry at her. She doesn't know what I did. She can't know. Before Richard could respond, Rosa pushed open the door. The room was small and filled with the quiet beeping of medical equipment. There was a single bed by the window, and in it lay a teenage girl. Richard's breath caught in his throat. Lucia looked tiny in the hospital bed, swallowed up by white sheets and blankets. She was pale, her skin almost translucent. Her hair, which Richard guessed had once been thick and dark like her mother's, was thin and patchy. An IV line ran from her arm to a bag hanging beside the bed. Despite all this, when she saw her mother, her face lit up with a smile that transformed her completely. "Mama," she said, her voice weak but warm. "You came back. I thought you had to work?" "I took time off today, mi amor," Rosa said, rushing to the bedside and taking her daughter's hand. She leaned down and kissed Lucia's forehead with such tenderness that Richard had to look away for a moment. Then Lucia noticed Richard standing in the doorway. Her eyes widened slightly.
"Mama, who's this?"
Rosa turned, her expression uncertain. "This is Mr. Chen. He's my employer. I told you about him, remember? The kind man I work for." Richard stepped forward, feeling awkward and out of place. "Hello, Lucia." "It's nice to meet you." Lucia's smile grew a bit wider despite her obvious weakness. "Oh, you're the one with all the motorcycles. Mama talks about them sometimes. She says you have a really special old one." Richard felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Here was this sick girl, lying in a hospital bed, and she knew about his motorcycle collection. She probably had no idea that her mother had risked everything because of her. "I do have some motorcycles, yes," Richard managed to say. "Mama showed me pictures. They're beautiful." Lucia shifted in bed, wincing slightly. Rosa immediately adjusted her pillows, her movements practiced and automatic. "Are you here to visit someone too?" Richard looked at Rosa, unsure how to answer. Rosa's eyes were begging him to play along, to not upset her daughter. "Yes, something like that," Richard said carefully. "Your mother asked me to stop by." They talked for a few more minutes, simple conversation that felt surreal. Lucia told him about the book she was reading, about how nice the nurses were, about how she hoped she could go home soon. She spoke slowly, taking breaks to catch her breath. Richard noticed how Rosa watched her daughter's every movement, how she anticipated every need before Lucia even voiced it. After about 15 minutes, Lucia's eyelids started to droop. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I get tired so easily now." "Rest, baby," Rosa said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "I'll be right here." Within moments, Lucia had drifted off to sleep. Rosa stood by the bed for a long moment, just watching her daughter breathe. Then she turned to Richard and gestured toward the door. They stepped out into the hallway. Rosa closed the door softly behind them and leaned against the wall, like standing upright was taking all her strength. "She has leukemia," Rosa said quietly. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. We found out 8 months ago." Richard felt the hallway tilt slightly. He leaned against the opposite wall, facing Rosa. "The doctors say she needs a bone marrow transplant. We finally found a match 3 weeks ago." "A match, Mr. Chen? Do you know how rare that is?"
How lucky we are?
Rosa's voice was shaking. "But the transplant has to be done at a special hospital, not here. A hospital 3 states away that specializes in this kind of procedure." "And they won't do it here?" Richard asked. Rosa shook her head. "They can't. They don't have the right equipment, the right specialists. Lucia has to go to the other hospital. And she has to go soon. The match, the donor, they have a small window. If we miss it, we might never get another chance." Richard was starting to understand, but he still didn't have all the pieces. "What does this have to do with my motorcycle?" Rosa took a deep breath. 2 nights ago, Lucia's condition got worse. Much worse. The doctors here called the hospital where the transplant is supposed to happen. They said if we don't get her there within 48 hours, we lose the spot. Someone else will take it. But I don't have a car that could make that trip. I tried to rent one, but my credit isn't good enough. I tried to call an ambulance service, but the cost was $8,000 just for transport. $8,000 I don't have. She wiped her eyes, tears flowing freely now. I called everyone I know. I begged, I pleaded. Nobody could help. And the clock was ticking, Mr. Chen. Every hour that passed was an hour closer to losing everything. Losing her. Richard's throat felt tight. "So you took the motorcycle?" "I took the motorcycle," Rosa confirmed. "Because it was fast. Because it was reliable. Because I knew it could get us there through the night. I wrapped Lucia in blankets, I got her medication from the nurses here, and I drove through the night. 4 hours straight. I stopped every hour to check on her to make sure she was okay. We got to the other hospital just as the sun was coming up. Is she there now? Richard asked, confused. We just saw her here. They admitted her, they did all the preliminary work, they confirmed she's a match. But then they told me the cost of the actual procedure. Rosa's voice dropped to a whisper. $75,000? My insurance covers some, but not enough. Not nearly enough. I'm still short by so much money, and without it, they won't do the transplant. So they sent us back here to wait while I try to figure out how to raise the money. But I'm out of time, Mr. Chen. Out of time and out of options. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much pain, too many impossible choices. So yes, I stole your motorcycle. I became a thief. I broke your trust. And I would do it again if it meant one more chance to save my daughter's life. Richard stood in the hospital hallway, Rosa's words echoing in his mind. I would do it again if it meant one more chance to save my daughter's life. He looked at this woman who cleaned his house, who folded his laundry, who made sure there were fresh flowers in his kitchen, and for the first time he really saw her. Not as an employee, not as someone who had wronged him, but as a mother fighting for her child's life with the only weapon she had. Show me, Richard said quietly. Rosa looked confused. Show you what? Everything. The medical records. The bills. The treatment plan. All of it. Richard pulled out his phone. I need to see exactly what we're dealing with. Rosa's face went pale. Mr. Chen, I'm not asking you for money. That's not why I brought you here. I just wanted you to understand why I did what I did before you called the police. I know that's not why you brought me here, Richard said, but I'm asking anyway. Show me. With shaking hands, Rosa pulled out her phone. She opened a folder filled with documents and photos. Medical reports. Test results. Bills with numbers that made Richard's stomach turn. Not because the amounts were large to him, but because he realized these amounts were impossible for someone like Rosa. They sat down on plastic chairs in the hallway, and Rosa walked him through everything. Lucia had been a healthy, normal teenager until last winter, when she started feeling tired all the time. At first, Rosa thought it was just school stress. Then came the bruising, the fevers, the weight loss. I took her to the free clinic first, Rosa explained, scrolling through her phone. They ran some tests and told me to take her to the emergency room immediately. That's when we found out. Richard looked at the diagnosis report. The medical terminology was complex, but the conclusion was clear. Lucia had an aggressive form of leukemia. Without treatment, she had months to live. With treatment, including a bone marrow transplant, her chances of survival jumped to over 70%. The chemotherapy started right away. Rosa continued. That's why her hair fell out. That's why she looks so weak. But the chemo is just buying time until the transplant. The transplant is what will save her life. Richard studied the bills. The chemotherapy alone had cost over $100,000. Rosa's insurance had covered most of it, but the co-pays and deductibles had drained every penny she had saved over years of work. She had taken out loans, borrowed from friends, started a crowdfunding page that had raised $12,000, generous strangers trying to help, but it wasn't enough. The transplant facility required $75,000 up front for the procedure. Rosa had managed to scrape together some of it, but she was still short by $53,000. And time was running out. The donor was willing to wait, but only for another 2 weeks. After that, the match would be gone. I've applied for charity care. I've contacted every organization I can find. I've worked extra shifts, sold everything I own of value. Rosa's voice was hollow. My mother back home sent me the money from selling her house. It still wasn't enough. Richard was quiet for a long time, just sitting there in the hospital hallway, listening to the sounds of medical equipment beeping, nurses walking past, somewhere down the hall a television playing too loudly. He thought about his own life, the houses he owned, the cars in his garage, the watches in his safe that cost more than Rosa made in a year. He thought about his daughter. Her name had been Jennifer. She would have been 14 now if she had lived. The car accident had happened 5 years ago. A drunk driver running a red light. Jennifer had died instantly. His wife had survived but left him a year later, unable to be in the same house where their daughter's room sat empty. Richard had thrown himself into work after that, building his company bigger, making more money, buying more things, The motorcycles had started as a distraction, something to focus on besides the empty space in his life. He had told himself that success was the answer. That achievement would fill the hole Jennifer left behind. But sitting in this hospital hallway, watching Rosa pull up photos of Lucia from before she got sick, a smiling girl with her whole life ahead of her, Richard realized something. All his money hadn't been able to save Jennifer, but it could save Lucia. Mr. Chen? Rosa's voice broke through his thoughts. Are you okay? Richard realized his eyes were wet. He wiped them quickly. I had a daughter once, he said quietly. Her name was Jennifer. Rosa's expression shifted. Had? She died 5 years ago. Car accident. She was 9 years old. Richard's voice was steady but barely. I would have given every penny I had, every motorcycle, every business, everything for one more day with her. 1 more hour. 1 more minute. Rosa's hand moved to her mouth. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. How could you? Richard looked at her. I don't talk about it. I buried it along with her. Buried myself in work and things, and anything that would help me forget that I couldn't save her. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Richard stood up abruptly. Come on, where are we going? To talk to the hospital administrator. Then to make some phone calls. Richard was already walking toward the elevator. How much time did you say we have? Rosa hurried to catch up. 2 weeks. But Mr. Chen, what are you doing? What I should have done the moment I saw Lucia in that bed. Richard pressed the elevator button. I'm helping. The next 2 hours were a blur. Richard sat in the hospital administrator's office and made phone call after phone call. He spoke to the transplant hospital directly. He talked to his accountant. He contacted his lawyer. Rosa sat beside him looking shell-shocked, occasionally trying to interrupt, to tell him he didn't have to do this. But Richard did have to do this. For the first time in 5 years, something felt right. Something felt important beyond balance sheets and business deals. By noon, it was done. Richard had arranged to pay the full cost of Lucia's transplant. Not a loan. Not something Rosa would have to pay back. A gift. He also covered the transport costs to get Lucia to the transplant hospital safely, with a medical team accompanying her. And he set up a fund to cover any additional medical expenses that might come up during her recovery. Rosa sat in the administrator's office, tears streaming down her face, shaking her head in disbelief. I can't accept this. It's too much. It's too much. Yes, you can accept it, Richard said firmly. And you will. Because Lucia needs this transplant and you need to focus on being her mother, not on how to pay for it. But why? Rosa looked at him with bewildered eyes. Why would you do this? I stole from you. I broke your trust. Richard thought about that question. He could have said it was because he was wealthy and could afford it. He could have said it was good publicity for his company. He could have given a dozen logical, business-minded reasons. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. Because 5 years ago, I would have stolen 1,000 motorcycles if it meant saving my daughter, Richard said softly. And no one should have to make the choice you made. No parent should have to choose between honesty and their child's life. He stood up and extended his hand to Rosa. You're not a thief. You're a mother who did what she had to do. And for what it's worth, I think Jennifer would have liked Lucia. They're both fighters. Rosa took his hand, but instead of shaking it, she held it with both of hers. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you doesn't even begin to cover what this means, but thank you. Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. They walked back to Lucia's room together. When they entered, Lucia was awake, looking at her phone. She looked up and smiled, that transforming smile again. Mama, guess what? The hospital just called. They said we can go to the transplant hospital tomorrow. They said everything's been approved. Her eyes were bright with hope and confusion. Did you do something? How did this happen? Rosa looked at Richard. He gave her a small nod. Someone very kind helped us, baby, Rosa said, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her daughter's hand. An angel helped us. Lucia looked at Richard, who was standing awkwardly by the door. Thank you, Mr. Chen, she said simply. I'm going to get better, and someday I'm going to find a way to thank you properly. Richard felt his throat tighten again. You just focus on getting better. That's all the thanks I need. As they left the hospital later that afternoon, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. A sense of purpose, a connection to something beyond himself. The pain of losing Jennifer would never go away. But maybe, just maybe, he could honor her memory by making sure other children got the chances she never did. Rosa walked beside him quietly until they reached the car. Before getting in, she turned to him. "Your motorcycle. I'll return it right now. And I understand if you want me to resign. I'll understand whatever you decide." Richard shook his head. "Keep the bike here until Lucia is transported tomorrow. Use it if you need it. And you're not resigning. When you're ready to come back to work, your job will be waiting. No pressure, no timeline. Family first." Rosa's face crumpled and she cried right there in the parking lot. Richard stood there awkwardly for a moment, then did something he hadn't done in years. He gave her a hug. Just a brief human gesture of comfort between two people who had both known loss and were now somehow finding hope together. 6 months had passed since that day in the hospital hallway. 6 months that had changed everything. Richard stood in the arrival area of the airport, holding a small sign that read, "Welcome home, Lucia," decorated with colorful balloons. He felt slightly ridiculous holding it. A billionaire standing among families waiting for their loved ones, but he didn't care. Some moments were more important than dignity. The transplant had gone better than anyone had dared to hope. Lucia had spent 2 months at the specialized hospital, fighting through the procedure and the difficult recovery period. Rosa had barely left her side, sleeping in a chair next to her daughter's bed, learning medical terminology she never thought she would need to know. Richard had visited 3 times, always bringing books or puzzles or anything to help pass the long hours of hospital time. Now Lucia was coming home. Not cured, the doctors were careful to say. There would be years of monitoring, of checkups, of careful watching for any signs of rejection or relapse. But the transplant had taken. Her body was accepting the new bone marrow. She was going to live. Richard saw them coming through the gate before they saw him. Rosa was pushing a wheelchair even though Lucia kept insisting she could walk. Lucia looked different from that pale, fragile girl he had first met. She had gained weight. Her hair was growing back in soft, dark curls. Most importantly, there was color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. When Lucia spotted him and his ridiculous sign, she laughed. It was a sound that made Richard's heart feel lighter. "Mr. Chen, you didn't have to come to the airport," Lucia said as they approached. "Yes, I did," Richard replied, falling into step beside them as they headed toward baggage claim. "Someone has to make sure you two actually make it home and don't get distracted by airport pizza." Rosa smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes in a way Richard had rarely seen before. She looked different too. The weight of impossible choices had lifted from her shoulders. She could just be a mother again, not a mother trying to save her dying child. They collected the bags and walked to the parking lot where Richard's car was waiting. Not one of his sports cars or luxury vehicles, but a practical SUV with plenty of room. He had bought it specifically for days like this. As they drove through the city, Lucia chattered about everything she wanted to do now that she was home. See her friends. Go back to school eventually. Sleep in her own bed. Eat her mother's cooking instead of hospital food. Normal teenage wishes that were extraordinary because for a while it seemed like she might never get to have normal again. "Mr. Chen, can I ask you something?" Lucia said from the back seat. "Of course. Why did you help us?" "I mean, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful. But Mama told me what happened. How she took your motorcycle without asking. You could have been angry. You could have called the police. Instead, you saved my life." Lucia's voice was curious, not demanding. "I just want to understand." Richard was quiet for a moment, navigating through traffic. Rosa turned in her seat to look at her daughter, about to say something, but Richard spoke first. "I had a daughter once," he said. "Her name was Jennifer. She died when she was 9 years old." He heard Lucia's soft intake of breath. Rosa had probably told her some of this already, but hearing it directly was different. "I spent 5 years being angry at the world after that. Angry at the drunk driver who killed her. Angry at myself for not being there. Angry at everything." Richard took the exit toward Rosa's neighborhood. "I buried myself in work and money and things, thinking that would fill the space she left behind. But it didn't. Nothing did." He glanced in the rearview mirror. Lucia was listening intently. "Then your mother did something desperate out of love for you. And when I saw you in that hospital bed, when I understood what she was willing to risk, I realized something. I couldn't save Jennifer. No amount of money or power could bring her back, but I could save you." And maybe that's how I honor her memory, by making sure other kids get the chance she didn't. Lucia was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "I'm sorry you lost her." "Me too," Richard said. "But helping you has helped me more than you know." They pulled up to Rosa's small house, the one Richard had driven past 6 months ago. But now it looked different. The repairs he had quietly arranged had been completed. New roof, fresh paint, fixed plumbing. Rosa had protested at first, but Richard had insisted. If she was going to focus on Lucia's recovery, she needed a safe, comfortable home to recover in. As they helped Lucia into the house, settling her on the couch with blankets and pillows, Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. "What is it?" Rosa asked, noticing his expression. "Another application for the foundation. A family in Colorado. Their son needs a kidney transplant." Richard pocketed his phone. "That makes 23 families we've helped so far." The foundation had been Richard's project for the past 6 months. He had established it in Jennifer's name with one simple mission: to help families facing catastrophic medical costs for their children. No lengthy applications, no bureaucratic red tape. Just real help for real people in desperate situations. Rosa had become the foundation's family advocate, working part-time from home while caring for Lucia. She reviewed applications, talked to families, understood their struggles in a way that no one else could. She knew what it felt like to be drowning in medical bills and fear. Her empathy and insight had made the foundation more effective than Richard could have managed alone. 23 families, Lucia repeated, looking at Richard with wonder. "That's 23 kids who get to live because of what you're doing." "Because of what we're all doing," Richard corrected. "Your mother is the heart of this foundation. I just provide the resources." Rosa shook her head. "You provide the hope. We all do. Together." They spent the afternoon at Rosa's house. Richard had planned to drop them off and leave, but Lucia insisted he stay for dinner. Rosa cooked, moving around her small kitchen with practiced ease, making the traditional dishes Lucia had been craving for months. As they sat around the modest dining table, eating and laughing and sharing stories, Richard felt something he hadn't felt since before Jennifer died. He felt like part of a family, not replacing his old family, never that, but finding a new connection, a new purpose. "Mr. Chen," Lucia said as they were finishing dessert, "can I show you something?" She got up carefully and went to her room, returning with a drawing. It was a pencil sketch of a motorcycle, detailed and beautiful. Richard recognized it immediately. His Vincent Black Lightning. "I drew this in the hospital," Lucia explained. "I wanted to capture it because that motorcycle, in a weird way, it saved my life. Mama used it to get me to the hospital in time. And you being upset about it being taken, that's what led you to help us." Richard took the drawing, studying every careful line. "This is beautiful, Lucia. You're very talented. I want you to have it. I know it's not much compared to everything you've done, but I wanted you to have something that shows that motorcycle is more than just a valuable object. It's part of our story now. Part of all our stories." Richard felt his eyes getting wet again. 6 months ago, that motorcycle had been his most prized possession, a symbol of wealth and status. Now it represented something entirely different: connection, compassion, second chances. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll treasure this." Later, as Richard prepared to leave, Rosa walked him to his car. The evening air was cool and comfortable. Somewhere down the street, children were playing, normal neighborhood sounds that felt precious because of how close they had come to losing all of this. "You gave me my life back," Rosa said quietly. "You gave me my daughter back. You reminded me what life is supposed to be about," Richard replied. "So I think we're even." Rosa smiled and surprised him with a quick hug. "You're family now, you know. You can't get rid of us." "I wouldn't want to," Richard said honestly. As he drove home that night, Richard thought about the motorcycle sitting in his garage. He had never ridden it again after Rosa returned it. Instead, he had placed Lucia's drawing next to it in a protective frame. a reminder of what truly mattered. He thought about the foundation, about the families they were helping, about the children who would grow up because someone had been there in their darkest moment. He thought about Jennifer and hoped somehow that she knew, that she understood her father had finally found a way to turn his grief into something meaningful. The pain of losing her would never completely go away, but it had transformed into something else. Into purpose, into connection, into the understanding that love doesn't end with death. It changes form. It finds new ways to express itself. Richard pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment in the quiet car, looking at his large, empty house. It didn't feel as empty anymore. He had people to call now, plans to make, families to help, a foundation to run, a teenage girl to check in on, a friend in Rosa who understood loss and hope in equal measure. He got out of the car and walked toward his front door. Tomorrow he would call the family in Colorado. Tomorrow he would continue Jennifer's legacy. Tomorrow he would keep finding ways to turn pain into healing, loss into love, and wealth into something that actually mattered. But tonight, he would rest easy, knowing that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the most beautiful transformations. Sometimes a stolen motorcycle can lead to finding your way back to being human again. And sometimes the family you build is just as important as the one you've lost. Richard entered his house, but it no longer felt like a mausoleum of grief. It felt like a home, a place where someone with purpose lived, someone who had learned that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or collected or locked away. They can only be given away.